Okay, thank you everyone, and good afternoon to everyone. My name is Michael. Thank you for investing your time for joining us for today's panel discussion among representatives from Guard Square and Pakistan Credit Malaysia. A little bit about the company. Guard Square is a highly regarded company in the space of mobile apps security. They are present in 85 countries and over 700 customers globally. Their vision is to make future mobile secure, whereas Pakistan Credit Malaysia is a highly reputable company in the credit finance industry in Malaysia. Pakistan Credit will be represented by Mr. Teng. Mr. Teng is the head of IT, like CTO of the company, whereas Guard Square will be represented by Sumitra and also Jonas, who are based both in, I think, Belgium. Ellie will be the moderator for the event, and the panel discussion will take about 20 to 25 minutes, and there will be a Q&A session thereafter. All right, let's start the panel discussion, and over to you, Ellie, to moderate and also to navigate the panel discussion.
Yes, thank you, Michael. Thank you everyone else for being here today. So to get started, there's a lot of resources out there with useful tips and tricks on securing mobile apps, but the details may be quite fragmented, really broad, or too narrow in scope. Now, with banking authorities stepping in to regulate minimum levels of compliance, development and security teams may find it difficult and costly to build and maintain these security requirements in-house. Now, let's take a moment to briefly recap the recommendations that are currently in place. Looking through the latest technology risk management guidelines released by the Monetary Authority of Singapore and the Central Bank of Malaysia, the primary emphasis is placed on ensuring environment, application, and code integrity at runtime and secure data storage. Our panel of experts is here to provide some insight and guidance on how to navigate the local regulations. So audience, if at any point you have a question during the panel, please do not hesitate to submit them in chat. So welcome again, panelists. Thank you for being here today. I want to kick things off with a question for Mr. Teng. So Mr. Teng, why do you think government banking authorities in the ASEAN region are now pushing for mobile application security?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, now lately I think the mobile app usage are increasing everywhere, and also the central bank are pushing for those digital economy. So also lately these cybersecurity fraudulent are increasing, and the central bank, especially the regulator, they are more concerned about the consumer protection, basically how to protect the consumer from the fraudulent cases. So that's the reason why the central bank or the regulator are very emphasized on this compliance and the mobile app security. So for example, this regulator, they want to make sure how to drive this cybersecurity awareness, and also how to increase the confidence level for the consumer to continue to use a mobile app. So one way is to how to emphasize or how to increase the mobile app security, so that increase the confidence level for the consumer and also the mobile app developer.
Those are some interesting points for sure. I can definitely see how the banking authorities would be concerned both, of course, with the consumer use of these applications, but also the security measures behind them. Sumitra, do you have anything to add?
Hi, Ellie. Yes, definitely. Before I answer the question on why, I'd like to state that the regulators, in fact, should push more on this. It's no longer a question of if your mobile application is going to be attacked. It's now today, post-pandemic, it's a question of when they're going to attack your application. I mean, you see, we live in a really deeply connected and a mobile world. The rise of smartphones and the spread of internet access has resulted in a massive shift in expectations from both the consumer side as well as the business users. And you can see that both of them expect convenience and easy access to information from any location. You know, it's so globalized today. The trend towards mobile and remote work accelerated dramatically in mid-2020. We all know this from the shutdowns due to COVID pandemic. It has forced many people to work from home. And people started relying more, I would say, on their mobile phones to both work and also to complete daily tasks such as like banking, you know, medical appointments, I don't know, food delivery apps. I do that from here, shopping via e-commerce, you know, gaming and much more. So a strong mobile strategy, it's becoming really critical to compete in this changing landscape. So it's already a mobile first market. Yeah, so banking and financial institutions and payment service providers out there, they need to address this evolution to build customer loyalty and also revenue streams for them. For example, I mean, predominantly, I work with the Asian markets, so I can give you examples like in Vietnam, transactions via smartphone has increased 177% year over year, you know, in 2020 versus 2019, and I'm sure it's gonna hit explosive growth in 2021. You're talking about post-pandemic. I mean, some governments, like you mentioned earlier, Ali, like Singapore's Monetary Authority of Singapore, they have proactively responded to the demand and the market shifts by awarding new digital banking licenses, for example, which offers some banking services via the internet or mobile apps. So the many benefits to providing customers with a mobile banking app far exceeds the risk. So, however, it's really critical to be armed with proper security. So, as mobile banking continues to grow, so will the number of exploits, and it is therefore critical to factor security into long-term mobile banking application development strategy and align with these regulators and also the industry specialists. So that's my point of view.
I think those are some really good points. I read a study recently that said in 2020, the average consumer spent 4 hours a day on their mobile phone. And the avenue that they used during their time on their mobile phone was primarily through apps. So, I mean, if that's only going to increase, we can only imagine, you know, how much more security is going to matter to protect those consumers. But let's place a spotlight on the regulations themselves for a moment. And I'll pose this question for Jonas. So Jonas, from a security perspective, do you see that the regulations are lacking in any way?
Hello, Ellie. Yes, indeed. So what we notice is that, first of all, there is a bit of an distinction between the must-haves in the regulations and the nice-to-haves. Furthermore, they also lack a bit of clarity and direction for the developers, and they don't even really map to industry standards. Let's dive a little bit into more details here. For example, we see that white box cryptography is a regulatory requirement in Singapore as well as Malaysia. However, white box cryptography on itself is not secure at all. So the thing is that these different white box cryptography implementations from different research groups get hacked very, very soon by another competing research group. White box cryptography is certainly a nice to have additional layer of obfuscation, but it will not protect your application if that's the only layer you implement. So it's important to have other obfuscation layers here as well. And it would be even fair to say that if your application is well hardened against reverse engineering, that it becomes quite obsolete to also have white box cryptography. Another requirement we often see is device binding or device fingerprinting. And the problem here is that both Apple and Google are heavily battling against tracking users with a unique device ID like that. That's also because well, people are getting more aware on their privacy, and there are also regulations for the privacy concerns. Think about GDPR. And then lastly, we also often see that there is a requirement for a secure keyboard that would protect the users, or the data rather, that these users enter against keyloggers, overlay attacks, or any other eavesdrop mechanisms. These secure keyboards can be quite useful, but on iOS, that's not really relevant because Apple already has something in place. They will force the developers to use the Apple native keyboard when security-sensitive information needs to be entered. Think about a password, for example. So a secure keyboard cannot really be used when it comes to iOS. And then lastly, something that's worth noting here is that the regulations don't really have any requirements for code hardening. They talk about hardening security-sensitive information like cryptographic keys, but in an application there's way more to protect than just these kind of keys. The code on itself also needs to be protected here.
Those are all very good points, Jonas, and I think that there are things that can be improved upon in the future. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add in that regard?
Yeah, I'd like to add one point. Maybe it's a challenge or question. Maybe we can discuss. Now, as a consumer, I'm asking as a consumer point of view. As a consumer, when I downloaded the mobile app from the Google Store or Apple Store, normally this one is a genuine app. But if let's say I downloaded from somewhere else, as a consumer, how do I know the app I downloaded are the genuine app? So for example, as we know, I think we can see lately there are so many the data leakage, especially those customer database are being leaked out from those major stores. So as a consumer, these are increase the consumer worriness. And when they do, they are worried that the transaction they transact, whether it is secure or not. Whether my transaction is it being tagged by the hacker, whether my payment information has been leaked out or taken away by someone else. So all these are worried by the consumer. So I think the regulators are very concerned on this one. So that's the reason why the mobile security are so important. And also, how can we increase the awareness or the confidence level for the consumer? This is a point I want to put on.
Oh, I think that's a really good point, and it's a very compelling challenge question to pose. I mean, right now we're talking a lot about the developer side, but Jonas and Sumitra, what do consumers need to be aware of when using mobile apps?
I'll jump in here, Ali. In my opinion, I mean, consumers, they put a lot of trust in these brands that they decide to transact with, and that consumers also expect, I would say, that these companies, they take all the necessary measures to ensure that security of the clients and the public is well secured, right? I mean, that being said, of course, the responsibility also lies on the consumer side, that they should be equally diligent about reading the app privacy policies that's stated, and also reviewing the permission sets, etc. You know, to be aware of these company security policies before choosing to use any of the applications, right? For example, like me, I do a lot of e-shopping these days, and I ensure that I read into these privacy policies to be sure that these companies are also taking security into consideration seriously, especially now. That's my take on this question from Mr. Ting.
And if I may add something onto it, as a consumer of an application, a banking application, for example, it's really hard to know whether that application is protected against these kind of threats. It would require some reverse engineering knowledge. And I think it's a very fair assumption that most users, well, don't have that knowledge. And also, even if they do, they won't reverse the application before they are going to use it in order to see if it's protected against vulnerabilities such as code tampering. These users mainly have to rely on the security mechanisms that are there offered by Google and Apple. And fortunately for them, these companies do a really good job in protecting their users. However, they lack a bit of features, let's say, or mechanisms to protect their developers. And that's why the developers actually need to protect themselves against malicious users that might want to tamper with such an application. Installing an application from an untrusted source, so not from the App Store or the Play Store, is something I would highly advise not to do. It may be tampered with. You don't know that as a consumer, but as a developer, you can certainly protect yourself against that by implementing a multi-layered solution against reverse engineering.
Thank you, Jonas and Sumitra. I mean, excellent response, and Mr. Tang for posing that question, because it is equally as important for consumers to be aware of the risk and to be knowledgeable and educated on security as the developers themselves. Bringing the focus back to the app developers, Jonas, as you did, Sumitra, in your experience, are there any common practices or misconceptions that you hear about from financial institutions on a regular basis?
Yes, indeed. I do come across some common practices and misconceptions in the region. This primarily circles around open source solutions. That's number one. I hear that a lot. Second is the misconceptions of iOS app security and also DIY architectures. Now, let me address the open source solution, like for example, like our very own ProGuard solutions. Right now, ProGuard it's a Java optimizer tool, and it's not a security tool. It provides really minimal. All these open source solutions, it provides minimal protection against reverse engineering. It does not provide the necessary level of protection against the aggressive static and dynamic attacks that you find today. And now Android developers, they find they need additional security protection beyond the basis of what ProGuard provides. And often, after failing the penetration test set out by these local regulators, is when they come to speak to us. You see, now the second most popular one that I hear a lot is the misconceptions of iOS app security. Now, many app developers still believe that iOS applications are virtually immune to reverse engineering and they don't need any protection. Now, this belief, I do understand. It's based on the three most common misconceptions. One is App Store's code encryption alone is enough. 2, iOS apps are very hard to reverse engineer. And 3, Apple's code signing mechanism prevents the code tampering and the redistribution of it. Now, we have heard it all. I mean, at GuardSquare, we've heard all the reasoning behind this. Now, what I want to raise to your attention here is the false sense of security with regards to iOS applications partly stems from Apple's solid reputation in the security field. Now, if you take a closer look at Apple's security architecture, it reveals that it's primarily designed to safeguard the end user and not to protect the developers and their application against reverse engineering. And it's possible, and of course, it's possible users such as like cloning or code tampering, etc. Now, what Apple does is it encrypts the code you download from the App Store and not the resources file that are part of the IPA file. Now, any iOS developer or a very seasoned hacker, they know this and they know where to find these backdoors, right? So it's unavoidable. Now, my final observation that I get a lot is DIY solutions or in-house solutions. Now, with this approach, you can only deliver very little in our opinion, because the focus will be on time to market, the app size, and the speed. Now, compliance and protection is not the main priority here. More SDKs, for example, more functionalities such as like these super apps that you find that's coming in the market today, it aggravates the situation. And often the developers, what they share with us is they're juggling between timelines, priorities as well as skills. And bear in mind, the majority of the app developers are not security engineers. If the functionality and user experience is their priority to them, and it's not security, and often security is left to the end, or even when the budget permits.
Those are really good things to point out, Sumitra, because these misconceptions and practices are not just limited to financial institutions, but to the development teams of many organizations, such as, from what we've seen, popular retailers, media streaming companies, travel booking applications.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with that being said, I'll pose my last question, and this is going to be for all the panelists, but let's start with Mr. Tang. Mr. Tang, do you have any recommendations for the listeners today?
Yeah, I will see the transaction, the tapping are very rampant on. It can happen in anywhere, and also, so my recommendation whether we can increase or we can improve this encryption transaction between the mobile app and the host by introducing the encryption and also the handshaking methodology, so that the transaction from the mobile app sending to the server to do the verification authentication are encrypted, and the server will know that the transaction coming from the mobile app are genuine app and also is a genuine transaction. So with this the server itself or the application itself will know that the transaction will not be tampered, and also the application are embedded to the mobile phone, and also always there's a security, the key exchange within a certain timeline, so that end-to-end transactions are encrypted and protected. So these are what I can think of. I think mobile app developer can improve on certain type of security on this area.
Thank you for those recommendations. Jonas?
So when it comes to protecting against reverse engineering, I would highly recommend to go with a solution that operates on the bytecode, bitcode level. So not a wrapper solution, but one that really adjusts the bytecode and bitcode of your application or SDK, and of course implement as much layers of protection as possible to defend against reverse engineering, because when it comes to these defense mechanisms, in the end, all of them are bypassable, but it will require more time depending on how much of these features or these protection mechanisms you implement. And attackers tend to go for the low-hanging fruit. So if your application takes a lot of time to reverse, then there is a better chance that malicious actors are going to choose for someone else's application.
Thank you, Jonas. And Sumitra, do you have anything to recommend as well?
Yes, certainly. I'm going to expand on Jonas' feedback, but on a different angle, of course. In our opinion, you see, hackers go where the money is and where the job is the easiest, which means mobile apps today, they are becoming a massive target. I cannot stress this more. In fact, according to our own GuardSquare study, 75% of mobile application fails the basic security test. Now, given this really eye-opening statistics, financial regulators are becoming stricter when it comes to mobile app shielding, and they should, and we completely agree with them, they must become stricter. I mean, we are aligned with these regulators. We develop software that comes, that some of the founding members of EMVCO refer to our tools in their engineering user manuals. We comply with the several regulatory industry standards such as PSD2, CPOC, SPOC, PCI. Now, if you want to find out more, please contact our authorized local partner, Matrix Event, as displayed in the screen earlier, and we will be happy to address any questions that you might have on this.
Thank you very much, panelists, for your recommendations and really going over all the topics today. I think now in the last 5 minutes we can open the floor to any questions that there were. if I'm not mistaken, I think there is at least one question. Okay. So the question is, apart from regulatory bodies addressing security concerns, what are the recommended best practices for mobile banking applications? Jonas, Sumitra, Mr. Tang?
I think just now I also highlighted on this point. To protect the mobile app and also the transaction, maybe we can introduce or we can look into the embedded app through the mobile phone. Secondly, to do the end-to-end encryption. Now, end-to-end encryption is important in the sense that not only just end-to-end encryption, also to do the handshaking the transaction. Handshaking in the sense that the server itself will able to know the transaction coming from the mobile app itself are genuine, because every time the server and the mobile app will do the key exchange. So every time when you do the key exchange, you will know that transactions are the genuine and the transaction coming from the genuine app. Even though the app, if they say they're able to do the reverse engineering, they will not able to know what are the key exchange methodology and what are the next key exchange the server is asking for. So if they say they do the reverse engineering, or the people, I mean the man attack in the island, in the middle, so the transaction sent into the host will be, it's not a genuine transaction. So the host itself can reject that kind of transaction. So I will see the end-to-end encryption and the key exchange is very important for this increase the mobile security app.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I actually had something that I wanted to add to that as well. And I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is security is not a one-stop shop. And it's not something that should be done towards the end of the development phase of a mobile banking application. So some of the best practices that I think that any mobile development team, but especially in mobile banking, is to include security in every step of your development process, from the design phase to the testing phase, implementing secure coding guidelines, vulnerability testing assessments, of course, adding a multi-layer approach of static and dynamic protection in your app, even to post-launch having something that's going to monitor your applications while they're in the wild. I think these are all very important steps that you should be taking to implement this security and to make sure your apps are being protected. And back to what I said originally, is that it's not a one-stop shop. As Mr. Tang said, is focusing on this end-to-end encryption. There's a lot of different security solutions out there that can strengthen your security posture. Anything from kind of what GuardSquare does, which is to mobile application protection, in-app shielding, however you'd like to phrase it, to fraud management platforms. There's a lot of different mechanisms that you can use, and you should be using all of these. Two-factor authentication, OTP if you need to. Those are just some of the recommendations that I have, other than mapping to other industry standards, of course, such as OWASP and PCI, keeping these all in mind while you're building your mobile applications. Jonas or Sumitra, did you have anything to add on that?
I think you pretty much summed it up, Ellie.
Awesome.
I agree as well.
Are there any other questions? We still have 1 minute left. So it doesn't look like there's any other questions coming in. But of course, this isn't the only time that you can ask questions. If after this webinar you think of something, or you want to get in contact with our teams, you can reach out to Michael Lim, whose email is on the screen right here or give a call to Matrix Invent, our local partner, and they'll be happy to get you connected and have some conversations more in depth about mobile application security. So once again, I'd like to thank everyone for their time today. Enjoy the rest of your day and make security a priority.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you all.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.